about it. So the first thing is to think about it. And this is probably the most powerful thing we could ever do. If you want to bring a change in anything, you bring a bit of consciousness towards it. If you start thinking about it, start worrying about it, like, think about it a little bit and wonder like how much control you have over it. So obviously the thinking page is on the back, so we can turn the page over if you haven't already. So not on here anymore, on the back of this. So one of the main things which we kind of try and encourage when we're trying to think is the questions that we ask ourselves. So on this page we have two exercises, two ways in which we're able to kind of bring a lot more attention to our relationship with Allah. So the first way is a self-assessment where we kind of think about ourselves. And this is very different because, for example, if I ask you the question, how is your connection with Allah? We all will probably try and answer it in some way. But it's actually a very complex question. It's actually a very detailed subject. So we've probably not thought about it enough to give a good answer to this question. So very often it's useful just to think about it, maybe ask some of these questions. So there's a self-assessment, which is to try and find out where we are. And then there's envisioning the future, considering we just started 2020, so we can consider how we want to be in 2021. And that's kind of looking into the future. So where we are, we need to figure that out, and kind of where we want to go, which needs to kind of be figured out as well. Does that make sense? So it's very important to kind of be open at this point, and happy to kind of explore the options. Unless we spend every day thinking about this. Most people don't think about this too much. So bring a bit of attention to where we are at the moment, where our connection is at the moment. And it's really important to kind of be curious about this. This very often, sometimes I teach people and I ask them this question. And like, how is your connection to Allah? And there's like, there's a bit of tension which comes in the room. People get worried about this question. Because we think we're meant to be connected to Allah. We can't not be connected. So if you think about it, like, it's up to us how connected we are. We have to work on that. We have to make it a process. And if we work on it, we'll be able to kind of make it better. So the first exercise, the self-assessment, is where we try and bring attention to our own relationship with Allah, our connection with Allah at the moment. And what's really helpful is when we don't worry about this too much. If we don't think, oh, I'm not connected to Allah, so that's really bad. If we start thinking like that, this becomes a bit of a scary exercise. So it's always very useful to actually be curious. Like, this is an interesting subject, actually. Like, how is my connection with Allah? Maybe, it's something which we can try and work on. Maybe change it. Maybe make it better. Make it stronger. So this is really important, to be open to the idea of this kind of change. And very often, kind of, we grow up without liking mistakes and failure. We're always like, we shouldn't do anything wrong. We should be connected to Allah. Everyone should read Quran without any mistakes. And then we kind of find it difficult to make any kind of mistakes. So it's important to be ready to kind of ask some of the difficult questions. So when we ask these questions, sometimes we've already got a resistance to them. That, am I connected to Allah? Yes, of course I am. I'm as connected as I want to be, which is fine, but it doesn't help us go forward very well. So it's important to try and let go of too much resistance to these questions and think about them as openly as we can. Does that make sense? So the first question is, how is my connection to Allah? So this is obviously like quite a big question. So taking our time to think about that regularly, how is my connection to Allah? Every day, ideally, will help us try to figure out how we can affect our connection to Allah. Then, to make it a bit more specific, you can come on to the second question, which is, how is my concentration in Salah? As we know, Salah exists for one of the most important reasons, which is to connect us to Allah. So if not much is happening in our Salah, and it's kind of, we just, find it a bit boring, then maybe we need to bring some, focus to our Salah. Maybe work out a strategy to sort out our focus, to work on this category. And obviously one of the things about disconnection is that if by default we're all connected to Allah, and then slowly through time, based on the way we grow up, based on the way that we live, we slowly start to disconnect from Allah, then that will mean that everybody will be disconnected on a different level. We've all had different upbringings. We've all had different things going on in our lives. So if we don't think, and we try and follow generic rules as if they apply regardless, then it will be difficult for us to actually make a change for ourselves. Very important is for us to start thinking about it, and think about it because the plan that we're going to make for ourselves is going to be unique to ourselves, unique to our circumstances. Even the questions here, these are some generic questions. But everyone here, for themselves, can probably figure out some more specific questions for themselves. Does that make sense? So if generally, how is my connection to Allah is too general, then we can make it more specific, like how is my dua? How is my salah? How often do I come to the masjid? How is my learning about Islam? We can ask whatever we think we need to focus on. We can start asking these questions here, and then we can start understanding kind of where we are. Yeah. If we can try and work out how much we know about Islam, how much we've learned about Islam, how well we can recite the Quran, how well we can pray Salah, whether we know Arabic, all of these kind of questions. When we start asking them and thinking, then we start seeing loads of opportunities for us to actually for us to grow in our connection to Allah. Does that make sense? Yeah. So it's important to give ourselves the most complex kind of questions that we can on this. So this is where we are at the moment. So once we ask ourselves these questions, hopefully some of us have figured it out, but when we start thinking about it, we'll get more and more aware of where we are. Even you can ask yourself the question that, where am I? Where am I in terms of my connection to Allah? Where am I at the moment? And just spend some time contemplating that. So that's number two. The third and fourth question, again these are generic questions, but everyone has their own questions. The third question, how well we control our emotions. So again, this is a really important topic. The Prophet ﷺ would very often give advice about people who became too angry. He would say, try and not become angry. That person who asked for advice. And the Prophet ﷺ said, don't become angry. So being able to have some awareness of our emotions. Do we get too stressed too quickly? Do we get too angry too quickly? And then as a result of kind of being sad, we kind of just give up on life. And we lose all of our tawakkul. We lose all of the hope that Allah's going to help us, Allah's going to be with us, we're going to be able to get through whatever we need to get through, and we have Allah on our side. So again, thinking about how we react to certain situations. When something happens bad, how do we react? Because the default is to be connected to Allah. So very often we decide to take our happiness and our connection to Allah and put it in a place which is beyond us. We like doing this sometimes, because it means we don't have as much responsibility. We can put the blame somewhere else. So sometimes we take responsibility from ourselves and we put it beyond ourselves. Or we take happiness and we put it into the future. We say that when I get a certain job, I'll be certain happy. When I have a certain income, then I'll be happy. When I have a certain car, I'll be happy. And we have all of these things which are going to make us happy, but we never actually remember when we were actually happy. We just put happiness in a different place, far beyond it. The Prophet ﷺ mentions that لو كان لابن آدم واديان, that if a human being had two valleys full of gold, he would still want a third one. Because it's not really possible for us to really be happy, to always, if we become somebody who chases things which are beyond us, we'll always be somebody who chases things which are beyond us. If we're unable to be happy now and say, I'm okay with what I've got right now, we'll always be somebody who will need something outside of us to make us feel connected. So this is why the hadith of fitrah is very powerful. That we were born connected. We lost it as we grew up. We were born content and happy and perfectly fine with the world. And then we grew up and then started hating and becoming sad about things. So this is why emotions are quite important. So when we bring attention to this, sometimes we may get sad about certain things, we may get kind of angry with certain people, and obviously that contributes to the fourth question as well, which is kind of to bring a bit of attention to the relationships that we have. So, sometimes when we live with somebody, relationships with the people maybe that you live with, or people that are close to you, maybe family. So it's possible that with family and stuff, that we, over time, we lose a few of our formalities, and we become kind of not very good. We don't have a very good relationship with these people. So again, thinking about that. Sometimes people talk about their relationships as if they have nothing to do with it, as if it's just there by accident. They ended up in this terrible relationship, forgetting that they are 50% of it. That 50% of all of our relationships is us. We make up 50% of it. The other person only makes up 50% of that relationship. We really underestimate how much control we have over whether or not we have grudges with people or we let people make us angry, and how kind of affected we are with the way that we deal with our relationships. Does that make sense? So that's the first kind of exercise, to bring attention towards where we are, understanding where we are, and then moving on to the second exercise, which is to try and figure out where you actually want to go. So again, even with where we are, trying to understand where our taqwa is at the moment. Like, how aware do we feel of Allah on a regular basis? Trying to understand where our tawakkul is. Like, how much can we trust Allah and go full out and take a risk and actually do something? And know that Allah is going to have your back while you've done it. Is that something if that's something that you aspire towards, then that's something we can think about in our envisioning exercise. So the second exercise on the page is envisioning for the future, trying to figure out what we actually want in terms of a connection to Allah. So where am I in terms of a connection to Allah, and where do I want to be in 12 months? By December 2020, before the year ends, where do I hope to actually be? Like, what do I want? What kind of taqwa do I want? Do I want to actually feel the awareness of Allah to an extent that anything I want in my life which I don't want and I want to change, I want to stop watching films maybe? I don't know. Hard thing, yeah? So we think, okay, I'm going to try and stop watching films. And then the moment comes when we actually have to do it. And then we basically fail. So what we have to try and do is aim that inshallah I'll become somebody whose taqwa is so strong that when I think I'm going to actually spend 2 hours of my life watching what these people have made. Like, the film industry isn't a particularly big proponent of connecting to Allah. Most of the stuff they make helps us disconnect from Allah. Just like many of the industries in the world. So we have to try and be able to bring awareness to what kind of a connection we want. How closely do you want to be connected to Allah? Do you want to, whenever it's a decision to make in our life, whatever change we need to make, whether it's food, whether it's our salah, whether it's our connection to Quran, whether it's turning up for our lessons in the masjid, whatever it is that we want to do, we need to be able to bring our taqwa towards it. But when the time comes to give it up and I don't want to do it, we can actually go through it. And we actually plan these things with so much, we plan them well, that when we go for them and we make dua to Allah, that Allah allows these things to happen, they happen so well that we see them happen well as well. So our taqwa is always being exercised, and our tawakkul is always being exercised. So these are the questions that we look forward to. So by the end of the year, I want to have this much of a connection. By the end of the year, I want to be like this. So again, we can look at any aspect of our life. Does that make sense? Okay, so there's an exercise at the bottom which is kind of, I don't know why I didn't just put it as number 3. It's basically the third exercise on the page. So the question is, what advice would you give to yourself, or what advice would you need to give to yourself if you wanted to get to where you want to be in 2020 December, and what advice would you have to give to yourself now? Does that make sense? So now we've thought about where we are, we've thought about where we want to go, to some extent. And now, basically, imagine we got there, so what would we have to do to get there? What are the things that we'd actually have to work out? There's not much space for notes, but if you've got a pen, you can write stuff down. You can write your own questions in as well, or whatever. But trying to work out what it is that we'd have to do. Some kind of action. And this is obviously a very, very simple strategy. But thinking on a daily basis is very important. Thinking is like why we have minds. So, like, Allah tells us that the Quran only makes sense to people who actually think about it, isn't it? So we do have to think about who we are, why we're on this, why Allah sent us into this world, and how we're meant to connect with Allah. What is salah all about? Why are we praying? Why are we coming to the masjid? And if you think about it, it might make some sense, isn't it? I mean, Allah sends His own book, He makes a book, writes like His own word, and then we get the chance to read what He's written about how to live life. So all of the answers are there for us. So it's up to us to try and bring some of our own consciousness. And sometimes this is the solution itself. This is bringing the consciousness. Your brain will then realize that this is something we're working on. We're working on connecting to Allah. It becomes a project. It becomes a lifelong project. Is that okay? Okay, inshallah. So we said we're going to do 3 things. We're going to first talk about what is a connection to Allah. Then we're going to do the first tool, which was thinking. So we've got some thinking skills. Now the second exercise, the second tool, and the last part of the lesson, is learning to recite the Quran properly. And this is a bit more practical, I think. But I think if we think about Islam, basically, if you can pray properly, the rest of your life starts sorting itself out usually. So it's quite a useful thing to kind of